What up, Hepsters? Bone Ceasy here, Intangible Roots, back with the second knowledge drop. Today, we're going to talk about something that keeps coming up in conversations that, you know, comes up in timelines and what have you, is this label commercial jazz. Now, in the last episode, I talked about the label commercial dance and why the word commercial is problematic. We've already talked about that last time. Commercial is a label. So, if commercial jazz isn't a technique, because there is no commercial technique, there's no commercial vocabulary, there's no commercial form, right? This is just a label. So, what is it, right? It's not a codified form, codified, wherever you're from. It's not a tradition, right? So what is it? It's a marketing category. Plain and simple, it's a marketing category. As we said the last time, the word commercial tells us what? It tells us the purpose of the dance, to sell something, right? To entertain, to fit into this music industry of advertising and Broadway and television. And, you know, it's a context. It's not a codified movement system. So why are we using this language? Language is important. We talked about that. So what gets called commercial jazz? Today is usually just a mix of ballet lines and angular isolations and gestures that are paraded to the latest pop music song with choreography that has like this high aesthetic, but kind of low in cultural grounding. But when you strip the movement of its roots, its technique, its true techniques, right? Its musical connection, its, cultural base, what you have is like this individual stylized movement, not a structured form. I've talked about like the difference between form and style before, so maybe I'll add that talk onto YouTube as a separate sort of conversation, right? But when we talk about authentic jazz, that's a cultural form. Authentic jazz, even the fact that we got to say authentic jazz is a problem, right? The same way commercial can be problematic. Encumbering the word jazz with things like vernacular and authentic, that has its own set of problems as well. And we can talk about that at another time. Right? This true, this real, this vernacular, this authentic jazz dance, it was born out of the ring shouts, right? Out of the spirituals, out of the blues, out of ragtime, out of swing, out of bebop, right? It lives in the polyrhythms, in the call and response, in the improvisation, in that groundedness we talked about, in the groove, right? It is connected to the community. First dance, in the social spaces, the juke joints, the ballrooms, the rent parties, and then later adapted to the stage. It is deeply musical. And there's a relationship that dancers back then even had with musicians. You could speak the lingo of a musician, which a lot of dancers today, they're missing that element. They're learning movement, but they're not getting the full spectrum of what true jazz dancing is. Jazz dance grew alongside jazz music, right? It's just like the music. It swings, it breathes, it responds, it's alive. It's um it's not about being clean, right? It's about being in the pocket. The people that are taught in these conservatories and these studios, you usually hear the same names. People are talking about Fosse or Luigi or Giordano, Cole, Hatchett, Maddox, right? These are the names that get circulated. These are the most popular names that get circulated. These are codified stylings labeled jazz, right? When you study Fosse, you are doing Fosse. And Fosse doesn't look like Luigi, and Luigi don't look like Giordano. They have a very particular way of that they feel the body should look. So that's what you're learning. You're learning a style. It is influenced by jazz, authentic jazz. It borrows in some of the vocabulary of jazz, but it also uses again other movement like from ballet or modern or what have you. And true jazz dancing doesn't need any of that. So They are not the authentic jazz dance forms. It's not in the tradition, it's not in the cultural space. It is just a styling. So they get presented as the pioneers of jazz dance, like the fathers of jazz dance, the people who gave it technique, who gave it a voice. And this is just simply not true. Because it's not the same thing as what was being done in the Harlem ballrooms or what was being done in New Orleans. This dance was around before them, and they have nothing to do with its creation. I wouldn't say call it a mashup of isolations or hair flips that's done to Beyonce track. That's not jazz either. So call it what it is, right? It's jazz influenced choreography in a commercial setting. Maybe it's that. So this is also creates part of this problem when we're talking about this languaging of what commercial jazz is. There's all these things that are that are coming together just for the fact of selling something. But what's not being sold is the truth, right? Here's the very people we're talking about. So we talk about Bob Fosse. Fosse created a signature style. It was for Broadway. You know, some people call it sexy or internal or isolating. They'll call it iconic. It's brilliant, ironic. But Fosse, it's Fosse style, right? It's not foundational jazz. He filtered jazz through his vision for film, for theater, right? We think about Luigi. Luigi developed what people call a lyrical, rehabilitative style of jazz that is influenced by ballet and modern, right? It's often called or referred to as Luigi technique, which is what I think people should call it when they're taking it, not jazz. But it sort of leans more into this contemporary and ballet based lines. Again, it borrows from that vernacular jazz rhythm, but it's not true jazz. Gus Giordano, Matt Maddox, both codified techniques. Their jazz stylings is heavily shaped by ballet as well and modern dance frameworks. They may use the word jazz, but structurally, rhythmically, and culturally, they move away from the raw, the polyrhythmic, the language of authentic jazz dance. Now, some people I think get what the polyrhythms are, they get that confused. Like true, if you're learning true polyrhythms, you are learning how to move sort of isolated body parts to different um, instruments, to different rhythm patterns at the same time. So the feet could be doing one thing, like the feet could be on the piano, catching that rhythm, while the arms could be doing the melody, and the torso or the hips could be into the rhythm section. Maybe your neck or something is catching some accents. That's polyrhythmic. It is not mimicking one particular rhythm. In the body, it is the body using multiple rhythms and catching them as that rhythm plays out. That's when you're really talking about being polyrhythmic in the body. What these artists did was develop personalized systems, right? Fine. It's influenced by Black aesthetics, but it's often through this white dominant studio model, and this is how it's still taught today. They sort of, again, filtered true jazz through this Eurocentric lens to create the styles that they have. This is strictly for performance. Nobody is doing this stuff in a club. I mean, it's not to say that you couldn't do it in the club, but nobody's doing it in the club. So they're creating styles for performance, not for the preservation of Black cultural lineage. You need to know who these people are, right? This is Buddy Bolden, or but sorry, Buddy Bradley, Clarence Buddy Bradley. Uh, do some research on Clarence if you never heard of him. Major player in Hollywood back in the day. He's the one that taught everybody, especially when it came to tap and solo jazz. Busby Berkeley's choreography, if it had tap in it, was done by um, Buddy Bradley. You should know who these people are. Again, we keep talking about the Fosses and the Luigis and the such, but you need to know who Harlem Congaroos were, who Whitey's Lindy Hoppers were, Shorty George and his group consisting of people like Edith Matthews and Twist Twist Mouth George and Leroy Stretch Jones and Matty Purnell. You need to know John Bubbles and what his contributions were in tap. You need to know who Jenny Lagon is, and of course, Bill Robinson. These are some of the names that you should be learning about when it comes to jazz. You need to know who Dawn Hampton was and what they've done. You need to know who Mabel Lee is, excuse me, and you need to know who Norma Miller was. Also, Madeline Jackson, Florence Mills, who was probably the biggest star in the early jazz period. Much better dancer, stronger dancer than Josephine Baker. Josephine Baker actually took over her spot once she left Shuffle Along. But again, Jenny Lagon, Marie Bryant, Ida Overton Walker. You need to know the importance of Ida Overton Walker, who taught the dancers at 6 Feet Follies. So these are like the people that you don't hear about in jazz. So just like voguing is not just posing, right? Jazz is not just energy in lines, right? It's a system that is rooted in specific cultural experience and musical frameworks. These are the things that gets missing. So why does this matter, right? We're talking about this languaging. Why does it matter? When we call anything jazz, or when we present jazz as a marketing tool, right, we water down what jazz really is, right? It erases the Black roots, we erase its rhythm, we erase the community that shaped it through celebration, through struggle, through spirit. And when people teach these, if you want to say studio stylings or just these stylings as jazz, without naming their creators, right? Without explaining their divergence from the authentic form, we're not just mislabeling, we're miseducating, right? And this is why it's important. We have to be clear about what this is if we're trying to preserve and keep these lineages alive. So we're telling students that performance is more important than practice. Polish matters more than the pocket, that choreography matters more than the culture, right? But jazz, real jazz, is about freedom, it's about rhythm, it's about community, it's about play. It's not choreographed first, it's felt first, right? Personally, I think we should be a little bit more specific. So if you're in a class and because even if you're learning this thing called commercial, you're not learning commercial, you're learning a particular style and you're doing it in a commercial setting, venue, if you will. So I say, if it's Fosse, then that's what you're learning. You're learning Fosse style. If it's Luigi technique or style, then you're learning that. So I think that's what needs to be said. Like, this is jazz class. No, that's not jazz. Jazz looks like this over here. That is the stylings of Fosse or the stylings of Luigi or Giordano or whomever. So personally, I think that's what should be said. Now, I'm not going to come in nobody's class. You need to change. But I think if we're talking about preservation, if this is the conversation, then I think this is what we should be doing. But okay, so in closing, language matters, lineage matters, and if we're going to dance jazz, like really dance it, then we need to know its roots. We need to honor its people. We need to protect those names. So the next time that you hear someone saying like, hey, it's commercial jazz class, I think you should ask them, like, what do you mean by that? It is a styling of these individuals over here, or is it a true form of what jazz dance is, right? Because again, the form of jazz is already existing. It allows, once you learn it, it allows you to find your own voice in it. And it's musical and it's Africanist and it's American as well. And it deserves to be known and not rebranded. I hope this, gives you something to think about. And if it does, hit the like, hit the comment, or drop a comment, hit the share, tell your friends about it, and keep asking questions. Jazz is not just movement, it is a language. Learn to speak it with respect. All right, peace.